All right, we are back here on SportsLine. Our phone lines are open, 737-7767. We are talking the Titans. We will hear from Ken Wisenhunt coming up. But what are your thoughts on Friday's 31-24 loss to the Falcons? Start off about as bad as it could with the defense giving up a 91-yard touchdown march. Then an interception from Marcus Mariota that led to a field goal by Atlanta. And then a fumble by Mariota that got scooped and scored. And it was 17-0 before you knew it. Fortunately, it's just the preseason, and things can only go up from here. William is called in. William, good evening. You're first up tonight on SportsLine. Thanks for calling.
How are you?
Doing well.
Excuse me. The problem I have with the Titans is Locker was going to be the savior. Then I was going to be Mettenberger, and now it's Mariota. In my opinion, the savior of the Titans is going to be a revamp of the front office.
What else? I mean, I think there are other people who share your opinion there, William. What are some of the other things you want to see done on the field? Because obviously, if you want a revamp of the front office, you want some player personnel changes as well. So if it's not the quarterback, what else do you want to see changed?
No, first of all, Mariota is not a disappointment at all. I think they made a really good choice with him. But it seems like they kind of lose their focus as they go on down. I made this comment with John Burton, and he sort of got mad at me, it seemed like. But I read, I can't remember the name of the name of the book now, but it was written by John Madden, and he said the basic component of a winning football team is an offensive line, and that's obviously what the Titans haven't had in a while.
Yeah, and that's really mysterious too, because this offensive line started to be built under Mike Munchak, who's a Hall of Fame offensive lineman in his own right, and when he was an offensive line coach, one of the best, if not the best, offensive line coaches in the league. And so you would think if there was somebody who could identify guys who could be really good at this level, Mike Munchak would have been the guy. But for whatever reason, injuries perhaps in Andy Levitre's case, age with some guys on the line leading up to this year, and now some new pieces. This line has not meshed together, and that leads to some of the shuffling that we were just talking about in the last segment as well.
I agree with that also, and I saw you on Morning Line this morning, and you hit on a real good point.
And which one was that?
Lack of depth.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is front office. Got to get guys who may not be top of the line, but good enough to keep a level of, I wouldn't say excellence, but performance.
Yeah, there's no question about it, William, and we appreciate the call. I think that's the big key with the Titans right now. If you look at the Titans, they've had some guys that were names or guys who could really play at certain positions. You know, Nate Washington had some good seasons at wide receiver. Kendall Wright has become a good receiver out there. Chris Johnson for a time was sort of hard to believe this now, but considered in the class with Adrian Peterson at the running back position. You've had guys on the defensive side of the ball that have been really good. The problem is when you have an injury or when you move away from a couple of those pieces, where's the depth? Where's the extra talent? Last year when they got really beat up on the offensive line or in the secondary, those were huge drop-offs when you got behind those guys on the depth chart. It's hard to be very good if that's the case. You look at some of the other really good teams out there, there's depth, there's consistency there. And if somebody gets hurt, somebody else steps in and does the job. That's been a problem for the Titans. And the other thing, to Williams' point there, where he said maybe a lack of focus, I think was his word, all the way through the draft. I think early returns now, you can't often grade these things out for 3 and 4 years down the road. But early returns, I think the group right now of Rustin Webster in the front office and Ken Wisenhunt as head coach, I think they've had two pretty darn good drafts at this point. Obviously very early, but I think what they're doing, these guys are going to see the field, and they're going to play. And play probably bigger roles than we've seen in some draft classes in the past when you talk about 1st through 7th round picks. I think where the Titans have really missed for several years, I mean, we're talking a decade back and several regimes in the front office and groupings of people making the decisions. I think they have abandoned the plan too many times here. You know, when you think about what they did with Vince Young and brought him in, some people liked the pick, other people didn't like the pick. But that division within the organization and Bud Adams kind of fighting with Jeff Fisher about where the direction of the franchise should go, it wasn't good. It wasn't good for the team. It wasn't good for the locker room. It wasn't good for the makeup. And they continued to battle over that. And for 3 or 4 years, that was the battle. And then when Jake Locker was supposed to be the savior, as again Williams said, immediately they went out and they got a free agent in Matt Hasselbeck, who was an established quarterback who'd been to the Super Bowl in the league. And he came in and nearly got the Titans into the playoffs. But instead of trying to add a piece to that team and say, okay, we were 9-7, we were almost there, how can we make this team just a little bit better to get ourselves in the playoffs? They kind of blew it up after that year. And really blew it up when they decided to go with Locker then over Hasselbeck the next year as the starting quarterback. That became a very young team. In essence, it was almost like you were telling Mike Munchak to have another first year as a head coach, because it was a very different looking roster, very different looking team that year. And that team really struggled going 6-10. And then they kind of blew it all up again, saying, all right, well, now we got to win. Because we've had back-to-back years here that have been frustrating for our fans. We're not in the playoffs again. That streak's starting to mount. And so that's when they went out and spent a bunch of money on free agents to try to make this team more veteran and try to get them back in the playoffs. They took some steps that year. They got to 7-9, became much more respectable. 4 or 5 games they lost in the fourth quarter that year. You turn a couple of those around, you may be talking about a playoff team. Your quarterback, Jake Locker, was injured much of that time. But what did they do then? Instead of building a couple more pieces there, it was ultimatums for Mike Munchak. And he was ultimately out the door, and in came Ken Wisenhunt. Finally now, I think over these last 2 years, you've seen a plan in place. And yes, they went out and got Mariota in the draft this offseason because he's a franchise, in their mind, changing quarterback. But for 2 years now, I think their plans in free agency and the draft have been building on one another to run what he wants to do on offense, to now have this 3-4 defense. That's been the plan. That's where they want to go now. And I think this is the first time in a long time that you can actually look at the Titans and feel like the plan that they've been putting out there for this team is more than a plan that they dreamed up this summer or this offseason. And it's kind of a multi-year process to make this a competitive football team. Now, whether it's going to work this year, whether it's going to mean that this can be a playoff team or close to a playoff team this year, obviously we're going to have to wait and see that. But I think the plan is there, and I think for the first time in a long time, they're committed to living it out. And if they're going to fail, if Rustin Webster and Ken Wisenhunt are going to fail in Tennessee, it's going to be because this plan doesn't work. In past years, it's been because they didn't stick with the plan. They moved to a new plan, and then another plan, and then another plan, and never wrote anything out. I think for once, they're finally sticking to a plan, and I think that should give fans some comfort here that perhaps better days are ahead. Let's go to Ron. Ron, good evening. You're on SportsLine.
Hey, good evening to you, Steve. I've been a Titan fan for a while, and, everybody's disappointed in what's been happening in the last few years. I think we've got a good young quarterback now. He's got an awful lot of talent. What we're doing, we're throwing him right in the fire. He's not learning under an older quarterback like Hasselback.
Right.
Not coming in there and sitting for a year or two and learning all the little things he needs to know. We're throwing him right in the fire. So, in my opinion, what's going to happen are either one of two things. He's going to be he's either going to get hurt or he's going to get gun shy. Now, a perfect example of that RG3, look what happened to him. He had all the talent and all this in the world, and he got beat up so bad, I mean, nobody even considers him a contender anymore. I'm afraid we're doing the same thing with our quarterback. I'd like to see somebody like Hasselback was. I mean, of course, not Hasselback now. Of course, he's retired. But if we could find a good quarterback and been to Super Bowl like Hasselback had, come in here and let our young quarterback sit for a year or so, learn under him, and let the game slow down for him, then we'd have a lot better chance. Build something around him, we'd have a lot better chance. Next thing is, we're going to have a proven quarterback. I mean, a quick proven coach. I know everybody's got a lot of hopes for Wiz, and I like the guy and all like that. But let's face it, if you're going to be a winner, we're going to have to go there and spend some money. We're going to have to get a quarterback from a Super Bowl winning team and pay him whatever it costs to get him to come in here and turn Titans around. Now, that's my opinion just as a fan. I'm not I played football in high school, and I'm no expert. But from what I see, I like to see those two things. I like to see our quarterback learn a little more before he's thrown into the fire, and I like to see a coach that hadn't been fired someplace else. He was lured here by a whole bunch of money. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Ron, I appreciate it. I think those are very good points, but I want to counter them with a couple things. One, if you remember, when they went out and got Ken Whisenhunt 2 years ago, he was the best coach on the market. He was the hottest coach. Detroit wanted him. Other people wanted him. I mean, basically every opening that was out there that year, there were 5 or 6, can't remember them all now. Minnesota was in the mix, I think, at a time. Everybody wanted a piece of Ken Whisenhunt, and the Titans paid to get him. That was how they got him, is they went out and they spent money. And Ken Whisenhunt, yes, he got fired in Arizona, but he got Arizona to a Super Bowl. So he's a guy who's proven that he could win in the postseason and can be a solid NFL coach. So whether it works out or not, you don't know, obviously. But I think it's hard to criticize the Titans for not spending the money or not going out to find the best coach available when Whisenhunt was the guy they got that year. Super Bowl winning coaches and Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, they're not just out there on the open market. Because if you are a Super Bowl winning coach or quarterback, the team you won for keeps you. And so if you're one of those teams trying to climb that mountain, you got to figure out another way to do it. And Whisenhunt was the guy that they chose, and I think certainly at the time he seemed like the best coach available. There's two schools of thought on the quarterback there, and I certainly understand having a guy kind of wait it out and learn, as you say, before throwing him to the wolves. But how many Aaron Rodgers are out there in the NFL? Aaron Rodgers sat back and watched. And when he jumped in, he was ready to go. And he's moved on to be, in my mind, the best quarterback today in the NFL. Maybe not with the best team, but I think the best quarterback to build a team around today in the NFL. But he's like the only guy that falls into that category. If you look around at the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, Tom Brady's a little bit of the obscure one because he was a 6th-round draft pick that came in because of injury. But he got thrown into the fire because of that situation and ran with it ever since. But Peyton Manning, right in there. Phillip Rivers, right in there. Drew Brees, right in there. Andrew Luck, right in there. Russell Wilson, right in there. You go down the list of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, they were guys, by and large, who were drafted high, had lots of expectations, and a team pinned their hopes to that guy that he could change them around. And I actually go the other way in that I think if they thought Jake Locker was the guy 4 years ago when they drafted him 8th overall, they should have thrown him out there in year 1. And yeah, that team may not have been as good. may not have gotten the 9-7 with Jake Locker. But if you go with Jake Locker that year, and obviously he has to stay healthy at some point, but if you go with Jake Locker, now you build over a multi-year process. And in essence, he just sat and watched for a year. And then the second year was basically his rookie year that you threw him into the mix, and it just never really worked. The plan never worked. If you're a Titans fan, if you're Marcus Mariota, you know what's in front of you right now. It's his team. This is his franchise moving forward, and he's going to have the opportunity to take the snaps right from the start. And yeah, there's going to be some hiccups. We saw him the other night, first preseason game. Couple things that he hadn't seen before and didn't react particularly well. That screen pass, he needs to burn the ball, get it in the ground, and live to fight another play. Instead, he turns it over. But you know what? You do that in the preseason, you see it in the regular season, you know what's ahead of you. You make a couple mistakes this season, you're better off next year for it. Until you actually get in there and see the live bullets, it's hard to simulate all that stuff. And very few people can just sit back and watch like Aaron Rodgers and then step in and be ready to go. I like the fact they're throwing him out there. Does it mean he's not going to make a mistake early in the season or maybe even cost them a game earlier in the season? No, it doesn't. Those things are absolutely possible to happen. But I think long term, if you're saying this is our guy, you're better off going to him now than going to him later. Good evening, Tim. You're on SportsLine.
Hey, Steve. I was going to ask you about old Mettenberger. He looked real good the other night. I was wondering if you think the Titans are going to wind up trading him off to somebody, or think they'll hang on to him and keep him in case Mariota gets hurt.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think
I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, Tim, I think you hit on it, frankly, there at the end. This team last year had to start 3 different quarterbacks during the course of the season for 5 games each, basically. One got 6. They're the second team in the history of the National Football League to have to start 3 different quarterbacks that many games. And it was all because of injuries and those sort of things. I think that makes you worried going into this season, especially when you talk about they're shuffling the line this week. To me, that's why Zach Mettenberger is going to be on this team. They would love to see Marcus Mariota play a healthy 16 games. And if he does, I think Zach Mettenberger very well could be a trade candidate moving into next year. But I think as you look at it right now, based off of the track record here, the quarterback doesn't stay healthy. So it's nice to have a guy that you can really count on there, and that's Mettenberger. If they are going to pull the trigger, they're going to have to get a lot for it. Do the Jets, do the Bills, do one of those teams step up and just give you so much you can't refuse? Certainly I'd pick up the phone and listen, but I think that point about the injury, the potential injury, and the opportunity to have a really quality backup right there in-house, I think that means Zach Mettenberger is going to be on this roster when the season starts. Let's try and sneak in one more here before we go to break. Let's go to Brian. Brian, good evening. You're on SportsLine.
Hey, hello. First I want to say, Munchak, I don't think he was ever really meant to be a head football coach. I mean, isn't he offensive line coach at Minnesota now?
Pittsburgh.
And at that time, I don't know how old Bill Parcells was or whatever, but couldn't he have gotten like a big marquee name coach, one of the guys who was maybe in the broadcast booth, Rex Ryan, Parcells, I don't know how it was, somebody, really big and flashy and stuff. That would have been great. But I think that the old man, the owner, was trying to keep a little control, and that was just bizarre. And then I was wondering, when they let Munchak go, I don't know what Fisher was doing, but he wouldn't have entertained coming back, will you?
Well, he was under contract with the Rams, so he couldn't.
Rams. That's right. He moved just a few hundred miles away. Yeah, that's too bad. As far as the quarterback goes, I agree with you, just throwing him in there. I mean, what the heck? I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you pretty much have to. I love Mecklenburger. Maybe they could platoon him. But I think he's got some great receivers. I think he's going to do great. I think we're going to have a winning season. I think we're going to be 9-7. I think we're going to miss the playoffs by a game. Or maybe get the wild card. I think it's going to be a great season. I think the fans are going to be happy, and I think good times are going to be back to the Titans. That's I'll let you follow.
All All right, Brian, we appreciate the call, like the confidence. I think there is certainly excitement about this team, and they're going to be better. I promise you that. It's not going to be 2-14 and uncompetitive like it was last season with the Titans. They are going to be better. The question, though, is what is better? What is better for this team? Is better 4-12? Is better 6-10 for this team? Or can they be a 9-7 type of team fighting for a playoff berth like the caller just said he thinks they can be? Those are the real questions. Is what is real progress this year and what's going to make the fans happy? Ultimately, it's that playoff berth. Can they get there this year? We got to take a break. We will come back. More of your phone calls. 737-7767 is the number. We'll also hear from Ken Wissenhunt coming up. Stay tuned. You're watching SportsLine on News Channel 5+.